Andrea, Ian, I'd like to start by asking you about what you think are some of the main challenges that families encounter in the realm of education.
Thank you, Karen. That's a great question, a very broad one for sure. So we thought between the two of us, we might break that down a little bit for this evening. The first thing I'd like to do, though, is just spend a moment or two thanking you again for inviting us this evening and talking a little bit about our team and what our function is, so that perhaps beyond this evening, families will understand how they can contact us and how we may be of service to them moving forward. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of context about who we are a newly launched military family services education team. And so what has happened is, as of January of this year, we've been staffed up in order to fill some of the gaps related to education that we've come to know about. So as Karen alluded to, I had formerly been involved with the OutCan screening process for families moving abroad with their children, ensuring that they had educational pathways in place for their time spent OutCan and in preparation for their return to Canada. And during that process, we learned from families firsthand that there were many other areas that they would be interested in receiving further supports with. And so Military Family Services stepped up and formulated a new team, and that would be us. So that's myself, and we have Ian with us this evening, who is my co-counselor. And we're also fortunate to be supported by a coordinator who helps keep us in line and organized, and our communication fluid with families. So we are available for further contact if you have any other questions that stem from this evening. If you have settled into the Ottawa area and you have further questions about schooling, if you know that you're going to be posted again outside of the NCR to your next posting location, this is what we're here for. So we're here to provide a pan-Canadian perspective and supports for you in a variety of areas related to education. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it first over to Ian, and he's going to tackle the question that Karen posed to start with. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Andrea. So we thought we'd start with addressing the challenge of choosing a school system for your child. I'm not sure what people's familiarity might be with the Ontario system. And so we thought we'd start there. So Ottawa is sort of a unique situation as well, because you can choose from publicly funded education systems on both sides of the border. And of course, that's determined by where you locate. So families could locate in the urban boundaries of Ottawa. They could locate or choose to live on the Quebec side in Gatineau, the Gatineau-Hull area. But then there's also a quite large school board that surrounds the city, or set of school boards that surrounds the city in the rural areas. So on the Ontario side, if you're not familiar, you can choose from 4 publicly funded school boards. There's a French and English public board and a French and English Catholic board within the city and within the outlying areas. Anybody can register with a English public board school or a Catholic school. There's no specific religious requirement to attend a Catholic school. So there's those options, and the variety of factors go into deciding where you might register your child if you haven't already. Transportation is a consideration. The school boards do have different models for transportation. Who qualifies, especially for older students, so grades 7 through 12. The school models are a bit different when you start to look at high school or secondary schools. Most of the Catholic schools in Ottawa are 7 to 12, and only a couple of the English public schools are. So there's a variety of considerations that you might want to look at. The French schools do have a language requirement on the Ontario side, so if that's something you're considering or have been looking at, it's worth taking a look at those requirements. And it's a single parent requirement with I believe the kind of the minimum level of parent education in French is an elementary education, but worth looking into. The schools in all the school boards offer generally the same curriculum. It's provincially mandated curriculum in Ontario, like in other jurisdictions. So it would be the same curriculum requirements and graduation requirements for whether you attend an English or French public or Catholic school. What else do we want to touch on? Oh yeah, one of the things you might want to consider too when you're looking at schools you might want to register your child or children at is the core French programming. So the Catholic boards, the Catholic board and the public board in Ottawa handle the amount of French and the entire delivery model around core French and French immersion. They handle it quite a bit differently. So it's worth considering that as well. The Catholic board doesn't have a formal French immersion program until after grade 3, but they have a greater number of minutes of French instruction in the with a grade 1 to 3 programs as compared to the public system. Public system has a couple entry points to French immersion, starting right out of kindergarten, and then they have a grade 4 entry point. So something worth considering as well. And then the other couple of options are the rural boards. So if you locate outside of the city limits, your children may be required to attend one of the rural boards. So, but the same programming and the same distribution of schools exists in the places as well. So French and English, public and Catholic. On the Quebec side, if you locate on the Quebec side, the curriculum is quite a bit different. And because it's a geographic model, if your residence is in Quebec, then your children would attend a Quebec school. So a very different system. The grade structure of secondary school, for example, is quite a bit different. In Quebec, it's 7 to 11, and then students after grade 11 attend a cégep. There is French and English instruction available, but the access to it's sort of the reverse language requirement in terms of being able to access English as opposed to French instruction on the Quebec side. If your children are a bit older and you do locate on the Quebec side and they're attending a secondary school, there is still a provincial French exam that they're required to meet to graduate. And then the last option is homeschooling. So if we know that some families are homeschooling families, and when they move to Ottawa, they'll consider, or the Ottawa area, they'll consider homeschooling as an option, and it is certainly a viable option. Would require a registration with the school board. The process again is quite a bit different if you're registering, if you're living on the Quebec side of the river. It's more ministry. The whole homeschooling model is more overseen at the ministry level, whereas if you're on the Ontario side, it's simply registering with your school board, and that's the oversight happens there. So those are sort of the options that we wanted to just highlight, and if there's specific questions, we'd be happy to try and address those later. So I think Andrea is going to pick up the next one.
Great. Thank you, Ian. So just to tackle other aspects of that broad-based question, we know that socially it can be very challenging for students as they move into a new jurisdiction, not only curriculum-wise, but socially. We hear a lot from families that, thanks to social media, it's been a saving grace for students who are able then to keep in touch with friends from the last posting location, which is a nice connection for them to maintain. We'll touch a little bit later on some of the upcoming supports that we have developed that may be of further use in that regard socially. But in terms of the curriculum, so entering the Ontario curriculum, it's important to know if you have a child at the kindergarten level. So we'll cover all ends of the spectrum, but starting at kindergarten, school age start happens once your child turns 4 by December 31st of that given year. They're eligible to register for what we call junior kindergarten here in Ontario. And high school begins in grade 9. So credit accumulation for Ontario starts in grade 9. It's a 30 credit-based diploma. So generally speaking, when families have been out-can and they return to Ontario, students tend to be placed according to their age. So they sometimes coming back stateside, for example, where the school start age is a little bit different and can be slightly askew by perhaps a year. What we tend to find is that students are placed back in their like-aged class as though they had never left. That's certainly at the elementary level, all the way up to the end of middle school, grade 8. And then once grade 9 is at play and credits have been accumulated, there would be something called an equivalency process that would be generated. That is important to know. It happens at the school level in Ontario. So it would be a process that would be conducted at the receiving school. Important for you to bring proof of credit accumulation, transcripts, and most recent report cards from the former school upon registration, if possible, and then follow-up documentation once school starts in late August, early September is usually the timeline we're looking at for Ontario and the NCR area in particular. So students, once they're in high school, they no longer choose a pathway until they hit grade 11. And so that's important to know. Things have been de-streamed. It used to be a little bit more streamed in grade 9 and 10. It's currently now de-streamed. And once students then hit their grade 11 year, they start to choose pathways that will take them beyond secondary school into their post-secondary pathway. Some of the unique aspects about the Ontario diploma would include graduation requirements that require a literacy test. That happens at the grade 10 level, and or if a student enters beyond grade 10, they are still required to take that literacy test as a requirement for graduation, and their guidance counselor would work with them to schedule them into that current year's testing timeline. Community service hours are another requirement for graduation. So 40 hours of community involvement are required for graduation. Schools will most often prorate the number of hours required based on the year of entry. So if your child is entering halfway through high school, then they would be required still to do 20 hours of community involvement versus the 40. That's the typical standard best practice in place right now in the NCR. There are some equivalencies for credits that have been garnered abroad that will be looked at more closely by the Student Services Department. Ultimately, they are signed off on by the principal of that school. So again, we encourage parents to be advocates in this process. If you're concerned about your child being accredited for the work that they've accomplished while you've been out-can, for example, we encourage you to be really present as part of that process when the equivalency process is being addressed at the school. The maximum number, is important to know this, the maximum number of credits that a high school student may be granted, however, would be 23 credits. So even if they have achieved beyond the 23 credits, if they're looking to obtain an Ontario secondary school diploma, they will be required to attend school for a full year's worth of credits. So that's important to know as well, okay? We encourage parents, and on our website, we'll make sure that that gets put in the chat so that you have it. We have populated our website with information that we think as parents you may find useful in preparation for the transition. One of those things is how to curate your child's portfolio. So the school transition portfolio, part of that would be ensuring that you have all of their up-to-date records in place. Their immunization record, for example, all of their academic records, proof of community involvement at their last school, those types of things. So we have a checklist there available for you to consult, and we encourage you to take a look at that. And so you have your folder ready when you show up at your child's new school. It's a bit of a time saver too. Okay, great.
Well, thank you so much, Andrea and Ian.